evaluations. After that, we think these are our main needs, and I think we addressed most of those guys.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from this weekend was, when you acquire the 8 players that we did, you were able to kind of stay in alignment with the board that we had set out. And we feel like we were able to address a lot of those needs, but you also didn't overreach for a need. It seemed like a lot of the guys that we had valued, we were able to get at the spot that we wanted, and that was kind of the goal for the weekend, and we felt like we accomplished that.
No offensive lineman this year. I think no offensive lineman last year. Is that just the way, things fell, or?
Well, I think here's probably the reason for that is we did spend a lot of draft capital a couple of years on offensive linemen. Obviously, we signed Big Whit this offseason. So when Sean, his staff, Coach Cromer comes in, because we had a relatively young offensive line, they were fresh in Coach Cromer's mind, and there was a lot of guys in our group that he wanted to work with, and felt like they may be better than some of the rookies in this draft class. So that's just the way it goes. Obviously, with a draft class, I think it's been well stated, and I'm not sure. It'd be interesting if this is the least amount of OL drafted in a draft class. Don't know that, hadn't checked, but I know the pundits had said this was a thin class. But based on all of that, those two variables, Coach Cromer, Sean coming in, going, what? There's some guys here I'd like to work with. Oh, by the way, we can get we can get a Pro Bowler in free agency, and then we'll go from there. But we did sign one player in college free agency. Won't give his name until it's official that Coach Cromer really identified somebody we might have drafted in the 7th round, and so we were able to get him. So that was good.
Yeah, I think when you really look at it, being able to add an Andrew Whitworth and what that's enabled us to do up front in terms of moving some guys around. There's some younger players. Jamon Brown is a young player. He's going into his 2nd year. And you look at Rob Havenstein moving those guys, giving Greg a chance to move from the left to the right side. Roger Saffold's played great football, and then you added John Sullivan, who's a veteran center that did a nice job this past week, and he's been great in the classroom first couple weeks of Phase 1. So I think when you look at being able to handle some of those acquisitions, both through free agency and the draft, we maybe did that with some of those guys that we addressed through free agency. So then you look elsewhere in the draft. But we feel good, and I think coming out of that mini camp really enabled us to have a better feel for our depth up front, and continuing to give guys a chance to move around and develop at those inside spots, and then also look for those guys that can back up on the edges.
And now, I think I'll do this, address the elephant, not the elephant in the room, but I know there's a element that, hey, the Rams needed OL, and we really wanted to closely look, all right, do we need OL, do we not? Because if you go back, we had the 16 season, we had the 15 season. 15 season, you're probably a top 5 rush team. You're a top 5 sacks per play allowed team. And then you go to 16, and you're basically bottom 30 in both of those categories with probably the same starting lineup. So at some point between 15 and 16, you're on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think, but these guys were young, got experience, and we felt like, there was some upside there, as Sean said, and with the success that they did show in 15, wanted to continue working with this group, plus adding Big Whit.
While we're on the topic, the same question for corner is can the guys in the corner room take this as like a vote of confidence that, the fact that you guys didn't go out and get corners means that you're, if not happy, good with what you got there?
I think when you look at just coming out of the mini camp, what we saw, I think there's a handful of guys that showed they can play at the corner spot. A lot of the things will be a little bit different in terms of the back end than maybe what Coach Williams had done in years past, or what Coach Phillips will ask our corners to do. But you look at Tremaine Johnson and Kayvon Webster, I thought they were excellent on the edges. Then you see guys like Troy Hill, Nickel Roby. They give us some depth. E.J. Gaines has played a lot of football. And then you really look at, LaMarcus ends up playing that corner spot when he slides inside to nickel and some of those dime packages that we'll play. So you just named a lot of guys right there that all have great, lateral agility, short space quickness. They have the ability to play man coverage, and a lot of those guys have ball skills. So I think we do feel like we have a lot of guys that can do some of the things that we'll ask them to do. And there were some safeties that showed some exciting things as well. And then obviously adding John to that mix will give us some more depth on the back end. And we feel good where we're at coming out of the mini camp and then this weekend as well.
Sean, I know it's really fresh because you just drafted these guys, but the two receivers that you drafted, how does that have the potential to kind of reshape the group that you have, and what can they add that maybe was lacking, or what can they add to that group?
I think the theme is you want to find as many playmakers that can create with the ball in their hands. And I think when you look at Cooper and Josh, they're two different types of players. But talking a little bit about Cooper last night, you really can appreciate the approach where he has a great feel, great instincts and awareness, great hands, a lot of production. And then when you look at Josh, he's a little bit longer guy, great ball skills, big catch radius. I thought he did a nice job in the Senior Bowl when you look at some of the things he was able to do, especially in the one-on-ones. He's been a guy that's, averaged right around 17 yards a catch throughout the course of his career. So he's had big production in the SEC. So I think two different types of players, but one of the things that I think you saw consistent in terms of the theme when you add Gerald to the mix with the three skill players on the perimeter that we did add, all these guys have great ball skills. And that's what we're looking for, that consistency, that reliability, that they can make plays. And I think you see all of these guys do a nice job after the catch as well. So different players, but they will add depth to that room. And like you'll hear me say over and over again, I don't think we can have enough guys that make good things happen when the ball's in their hands.
Les, the Senior Bowl seemed to be a common thread among your draft picks. Why was that a particularly valuable evaluation tool this year?
It wasn't intentional, but definitely utilized. And anytime we discuss a player in a draft meeting, we're going to see, hey, how we rated that player at the Senior Bowl, not only in practices but in the games. So I think the Senior Bowl is a great tool because what happens is you get to see let's call it in Cooper Kupp's, with Cooper and Gerald Everett, they can go there at South Alabama, Eastern Washington, and go play with some of the Power 5 guys, some of the best seniors in the class, and you can see them rise to the occasion or not. So it just happened to be a theme, but it's nothing that we plan, but it is intentional because we do really scrutinize the Senior Bowl because it means something. And I think I mentioned it last night. Usually when you go to the Senior Bowl and you play well there, you end up playing well in this league. And it's interesting. That's all the way to our Tulane defensive lineman. I can remember going to the Senior Bowl this year, and it was a hectic time because I think we had just hired Sean. Sean's hiring new coaches. I probably spent less time at the Senior Bowl this year than normally. So you get down there for a day, obviously looking at some of the receivers and tight ends because you knew you needed to address the offense. But I do remember thinking on the sideline of the scene, in Mobile, who is this guy from Tulane? Because he seemed to be in the backfield a lot. Now, what happens is you then go back. Our scouts, give him what we call, a thumbs up from the Senior Bowl, and you if you have something lower on whatever you have on him, you go back, watch him, and you realize, what, Tanzil's got something to him. So that's kind of how the Senior Bowl works. It's a valuable tool. It really, really is.
For both of you guys, if you'd like, we talked the other day about how the two of you might, work together in the room when the draft was going on. How did it go, and was it as smooth as you hoped it would be?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think you're.
What if he said no? I'm just kidding.
But it's like anything. You prepare. The main work's done in the preparation, and you got to be able to adjust in a draft because I was talking to our receivers coach, Coach Yarber, and for all y'all in the room, not you, Gary, because you're probably a SC fan. Coach Yarbs was a UCLA guy. But we were talking about recruiting, and he was going, this is obviously probably a little bit saner process than recruiting because you're really, evaluating, analyzing, figuring out whether, you want to take a player or not. And I told Coach Yarbrough the only negative is, hey, you can really like someone, but there's 31 other teams picking as well. So, you know, they may pick that guy ahead of you, you know, a few spots ahead. So that's the difference between recruiting or not. But the preparation is what it does is lead to what we were talking about being smooth. And there's going to be curveballs, and you got to be able to adjust and handle it. But that's why we have, if you want to call it a draft board, and you try to use the board to do that.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that stood out to me is, you know, the contingency plans were in place. We had a plan going into it, and for the most part, we were able to stick to that plan. And maybe when a team made a decision that we didn't anticipate, there was decisions that we had or scenarios we had already discussed that were in place, so you weren't really caught off guard. And I think that's a credit to Les and his staff, being able to have all that in alignment, and you can kind of just trust your board, trust the preparation that Les and his staff did, and the scouts, in addition to the coaches. You know, that was what I thought seemed like it made it such a nice process, is that when you get around that pick, you involve the offensive and the defensive coaches in terms of their perspective. Then we make a decision on which side of the ball we're going to address, and we move forward, and everybody feels included. And I think when that communication is clear, open, and honest, then that leads to that, you know, that unified vision that we're striving to create here, and that's what it felt like this weekend.
Great question, and you can probably strategize better earlier. So, I mean, and I'll use this year's draft as an example. Hey, Gerald, you know, our first pick was a favorite. Would have taken him at 37, but what you try to do is figure out where you got a chance to get him, but not lose him, and add a pick and with the situation, that's what you do, and you're able to, you know, you have this scenario A, and now there's some moments where when you do it, because when you do move back and you want Gerald, as Sean will tell you, you got to go through those other picks, and you know I guess that's where the adrenaline comes from, right? Okay, he didn't go off the board then, he didn't go off the board then, and you try to figure out based on team needs who did something in the first round, all of those things, and try to predict where they're going to go. Now, once you get into the later rounds, hey, you might get in the fourth round and Josh Reynolds is there, and maybe we didn't expect him to be there. Or maybe we had him rated higher enough where he could have gone earlier, but for whatever reason he was there, and you didn't anticipate it, and that's why we made that pick this morning. He was kind of, you know, one of the better players available on our board at a position of need, and became somewhat of a bonus baby, but was nice.
Yeah, I think it all goes back to that preparation, and when you're able to kind of just game plan and play those hypotheticals. Okay, if this happens, what would you do? And when you're able to kind of be thorough with that approach and that preparation, then I think it can lead to feeling very confident when those decisions have to be made based on what's played out beforehand. You feel confident in it, and that was something that even when you look at after Thursday night, here's the 32 guys that are off the board. We know that we're going to be picking in that fifth spot at 37, and you know, we sat there for about 3.5 hours talking through those scenarios and just making sure that when that came up, we felt confident, and that ended up playing out to our favor.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I like to say, you know, going into it, everything pre-draft is speculation. Every mock draft is as speculative as it gets, right? And usually, I like to say, after about let's call it after Friday night, and you've gone through first, second, third round. Really at that point, your board probably really means nothing, because at the end of the day, now you have, you know, 90-plus players off the board, close to 100, and there's 150 left. And at that point, hey, it doesn't really matter what you had on, where you thought they were going. Guess what? They're there. And now it's a matter, as Sean said, of, okay, what are your needs? Who do we like? Where there's buy-in, and that's where today was, where let's be honest, you go to pick at let's call it 125. There's multiple players you could probably pick at 125, and be okay. But that's when you sit down and you bring in, hey, the offensive staff, the defensive staff, and you come up with, all right, what's the top need? Okay, if we don't get that player, first of all, it's the player there. Is there someone that we're just as happy with later, or things like that? And that's kind of how you work it.
Les, this was your 6th draft, your first. How did this experience working with him compare to some of the others in the past? And for you, how would you kind of summarize going through this for the first time?
Oh, the 6 is my favorite. Concise, clear.
Yeah.
And it's a tribute to Sean. It really is. And it's 6. And with that experience, but I can tell you as I like to say, look, company picnics are great for, if you want to call it, bonding, getting close, all of that. But to be honest with you, I really don't believe that. I think they're a waste of time. But when you get in the bunker,
I'll make a note of that.
When you get in the bunker with people and you work with them, especially like we have probably over the last, pretty intensely the last 4 weeks, that's where chemistry's built. That's where you get to know someone. That's where you get to, really, really bond. A lot better than, badminton at the company picnic. And getting the bond with this guy to my left has been, it's a unique experience because he's a rare guy. Y'all have all been here. He can come into a room and he can fire you up. There's energy. You want to go to work. You want to be the best, and he's a big part of that. And that's invaluable.
Thank you, Les. That's very nice of you to say. No, I think it's a lot of the same. I think the working relationship has been so seamless because we're both very passionate about football, and there's been a lot of late nights where we're just sitting there watching tape, exchanging ideas, continuing to learn. I'm learning a lot from him in terms of how he evaluates. We're getting on the same page with how we want to see this team and what's going to be conducive for that long-term success that we're striving to create here, and also being mindful of the pieces that are in place. And I think the biggest thing that you take away from this weekend is that there were no surprises. Everything that happened, we were able to kind of stick to the plan and trust that if it wasn't maybe priority A, there was a priority 1A in place, and it was just able to just seamlessly go right down that list. And when you're not caught off guard, everybody feels inclusive, then I think that's when good things are going to happen, and this is why it was such a good situation and very seamless that I think everybody in the organization feels good about right now. And ultimately now it's about getting these guys in the building, developing them, and then helping them help us become a better football team overall.
What was it like to make those calls and deliver the news? Was there a more memorable response, or who was the most excited?
Well, I think it's a great day for all of these guys. Their life's changed, and Les makes the call and congratulates them, and they're all excited. And Artis is trying to record some of these phone calls. He couldn't hear them quite very clearly early, and Les was getting a little testy a little bit later on in the weekend. But no, they were all great. But I think each of those guys, it is such a special experience. But I think when you look at Sam Rogers, he was especially excited. I think he was crying on the other end of the line, and everything that you've heard about him in terms of the passion that he plays with, what he's meant to that university at Virginia Tech, I think it was especially exciting for him. But all of these 8 guys, they had a great sound in their voice, and looking forward to seeing these guys in person.
I owe Artis a public apology, but we're in day 3. It was round 6 or 7.
There you go. Hey, in all fairness to Les, he did apologize right after. He said, "I'm sorry, man. I'm taking it out on you."
Sean, you mentioned drafting Sam. What sort of role do you see for a fullback, or is he sort of going to be more of a core special teams guy?
I think when you look at Sam, he did a lot of nice things over the course of his career for Virginia Tech. Really versatile player. He will play fullback for us, so he and Zach Lasky will get a chance to compete. And I think both those guys were productive players in college that had good rushing stats. Zach being more of that fullback at Georgia Tech and kind of that wishbone offense where he got a bunch of carries. But I thought you saw Sam do a nice job contributing the run and the pass game. I think he's a guy that when you get him out in space, he can fit people up and press them on angles. And those are kind of some of the little nuances that we'll look for from that fullback spot. And I think some of the teams, you might not use it as often, but if you have a guy that you feel like can fulfill that role, you can do some different things that might regulate a defense based on who you're going against. And we're hopeful that those two guys will be able to do that for us when we're in our 21 packages and 22 personnel and different things that would require you using a fullback. I think he had a lot of different plays like that. I think as a ball carrier and as a pass catcher when he's slipping down the seam, but he does a lot of nice things, and I think he's done that throughout the course of his career. So that's why you're excited to add Sam to the mix.
Why do you remember the wheel route?
First off, he got way the hell downfield. Second, he threw Eli Apple.
Here's what's great. So
Going a couple of years back.
We're 3 days in. I've already, lost my temper and, now having to apologize to artists. But we go to review, let's call it a few spots before we're going to pick Sam Rogers. Sean and I are going to go review Sam because we did fullbacks, let's call it a week or so back. And when you get to doing fullbacks after so many meetings, they're not the most exciting players, right? So, but it's awesome. We needed energy, and Sean reviewing Sam Rogers and seeing some of the wheel route stuff. Sean is jacked about watching Sam Rogers. And I was like, this is awesome.
Did you see that one when he threw the touchdown pass?
Oh yeah, I think
Did
Sean
your
put a
homework
play
on
in.
Sam Rogers, huh?
I think Sean stood up, did some type of fist move, and designed a play for the playbook right then. Probably shouldn't tell the other 31 teams what's coming, but
it's coming. Indy, week 1.
Great question. I like to say in the 6th and 7th round, I just need a sponsor, right? Because they're in the 6th and 7th round for a reason. So don't want to hear the negatives, want to hear the positives. But I think that's where going back to the bunker preparation leads to, and where the work is done, and the coaches have done a nice job, along with the scouts. And yes, we all can have fun doing the first, second, even third rounds, but it's when the 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th, and at that point, whether it's each position coach, coordinator, Coach Fossil, he's done work on them, and you're able to basically sit and talk. Hey, how does this player fit? How does he help us? Does he have a chance of making the team? What's his role? And I think that's how you go through that. Because at the end of the day, the National Football League's a bell curve, and the great players, the first and second rounders, and it can be later picks that end up being at that very, very thin area of the curve. But we all like to say, championships are won in that fat area, and there's a lot of players that come from the mid rounds to late that fill up rosters, and when you're playing games and you're in a playoff run, and one of those guys in that thin area of the curve actually has to sit out because of an injury, there can be this other guy come in, and heck, he could be from West Alabama, college free agent, interception, goal line, Super Bowl win in Malcolm Butler. So you never know, and I think that comes into preparation, and it's really working with Sean and his staff and seeing what's a fit, what our roster looks like, how we're going to use players, and that's probably the fun part of this.